There was a time when fear ruled the hearts of men. Not ordinary fear, but the kind that silences armies. A valley stood between two forces. On one side, an army trembling in uncertainty. On the other, a force led by a giant, a warrior whose very presence broke courage before swords even clashed. And in the middle of this fear, stood a boy. But before we reached that moment, before the stone flew, before history changed forever, let me ask you something. What if the greatest victories in history were never meant for the strongest, but for those who refused to accept fear? If you want to witness how one moment can reshape destiny, stay with me till the end. Because this is not just a story. This is a warning. This is a lesson. This is the rise of Dawood as. Divine references what the three scriptures say. The story of Dawood is not a myth. It is recorded across the three great revelations. In the Quran, Allah mentions, "And Dawood killed Jalut, and Allah gave him kingship and wisdom and taught him what he willed." This is not just about a battle. It is about power being granted not by strength, but by divine will. In the Bible, the story appears in the book of Samuel, where David, a shepherd, faces Goliath, a warrior feared by all. It describes not just a fight, but a clash between faith and arrogance. And in the Torah, the narrative carries the same essence. A young boy, underestimated by all, becomes the turning point of a nation. 3 books, 3 testimonies, 1 truth. When arrogance rises too high, it is always brought down. The world before the battle. To understand Dawood as, you must first understand the world he was born into. The Israelites were not strong at this time. They were fragmented, disorganized, spiritually weakened. Their enemies, however, were not. The Philistines had grown into a powerful force. Their military discipline, their weapons, their confidence, everything pointed to one thing: domination. This was not just a battle for land. It was a battle for identity. At the same time, beyond this region, something much bigger was happening. The Neo-Assyrian forces were rising again. A power that would soon dominate vast territories. A force known for brutality, expansion, and absolute control. And along the coasts, the Phoenicians were expanding their maritime networks. Their ships moved across seas, spreading influence, trade, and power. This was not an isolated story. This was a world shifting. Empires rising, nations struggling, power redefining itself. And in the middle of all this, a shepherd boy was growing up, unnoticed. The shepherd, Dawood AS, was not born into power. No palace, no army, no throne waiting for him. He was a shepherd, alone in the fields, days spent watching over sheep, nights under the open sky. But this is where something extraordinary was happening. Because isolation does something to a person. It either weakens them, or prepares them. While kings trained armies, Dawood trained his focus. While warriors practiced with swords, he mastered the sling. While others sought recognition, he built connection with God. Every stone he threw, every moment he spent in solitude, was shaping something far greater than anyone could see. This is the part history often ignores. Greatness does not begin on battlefields. It begins in silence. The fear of Jalut. Now let's step into the battlefield. 2 armies stood facing each other. But they were not fighting. Why? Because a one man, Jalut, a giant in every sense. His height, overwhelming. His armor, impenetrable. His presence, terrifying. He did not just fight wars. He controlled them. Every day, he would step forward, challenge the Israelites, Call for a duel. And every day, silence answered him. Because fear had already won. Think about that. An entire army. Defeated without a single strike. This is what fear does. It does not need weapons. It destroys from within. The arrival. And then, one day, a boy arrived, not as a warrior, not as a soldier, but as a messenger. Dawood AS came to deliver food to his brothers. Simple, ordinary, but destiny rarely announces itself loudly. It enters quietly. He saw the army. He heard the challenge. He witnessed the fear, and something inside him refused to accept it. This is the moment everything changed. Not on the battlefield, but inside a heart. A question that shook everything. Dawood asked a simple question. Why is no one standing up? That question was more powerful than any weapon. Because it exposed the truth. The problem was not Jalut's strength. It was their fear. And once fear is questioned, it begins to break. The decision. Now imagine this. A young boy, standing among trained warriors, declaring that he will face the giant. It sounds impossible. It sounds reckless. It sounds foolish. And that is exactly how others saw it. But what they could not see was what Dawood carried within him. Faith. Not the kind that speaks loudly, but the kind that stands firm. The rejection. When Dawood presented himself, he was rejected. Who are you? You are just a boy. You have no experience. Even King Jalut hesitated. This was not just doubt. It was logic. Because in every measurable way, Dawood did not stand a chance. But faith does not operate on human calculations. The moment before destiny, and then, after hesitation, after doubt, a decision was made. Dawood would face Jalut, not with armor, not with a sword, but with what he knew. A sling, and stones. This is where the story becomes something more than history. Because it raises a question. What if the tools you already have are enough? The armies gathered. The giant stepped forward, and a boy walked out to face him. No fear in his steps. No hesitation in his eyes. Just certainty. The world watched, because what was about to happen would redefine power forever. The valley fell silent, not the kind of silence that brings peace, but the kind that suffocates. Thousands of soldiers stood watching, but no one moved, because at that moment, this was no longer just a battle. It was a test of faith, a test of courage, a test of what truly defines power. The giant steps forward. Jalut moved first. Each step he took felt like a warning. The ground beneath him seemed to carry the weight of his arrogance. His armor reflected the sunlight, not as protection, but as a display. He wanted to be seen. He wanted to be feared. And he was. Every eye in the Israelite army followed him, not with determination, but with dread. Because they had seen this before. Day after day. The same challenge, the same silence, but today was different, because today, someone had answered. The unexpected opponent. From the other side, Dawood AS stepped forward. No armor, no sword, no shield, just a sling, and a few stones. If you were standing in that valley, you would have thought this was madness. A boy against a giant. Skill against brute force. Faith against arrogance. This was not a fair fight. But then again, the greatest battles never are. The mockery. Jalut looked at him, and laughed. Not just a smile, but a laugh filled with disbelief. Am I a joke to you? Is this what you send against me? His voice echoed across the valley, carrying with it the weight of humiliation. He expected fear. He expected hesitation. He expected the boy to break. Before the battle even began. because that is how he had always won. Not with strength alone, but by destroying courage, the response that shook the field. But Dawood did not break. He did not step back. He did not lower his gaze. Instead, he spoke, "You come to me with sword and spear, but I come to you in the name of Allah." That moment changed everything, because this was no longer a physical battle. This had become something deeper. A confrontation between belief and pride, between reliance on self and reliance on the Creator. The difference no one saw. From the outside, nothing had changed. Jalut was still massive. Dawood was still just a boy. But internally, everything was different. Jalut believed in his size, his armor, his experience. Dawood believed in God, and that difference is what history is built on. The distance between them began to close. Jalut moved forward, confident, almost bored. He had ended many lives before. This was no different, or so he thought. Dawood did not rush. His steps were measured, his eyes focused, every movement controlled, because he was not reacting. He was prepared. The moment of action, and then it happened. Dawood reached into his pouch, picked a stone, placed it in the sling, and began to spin. This was not random. This was years of practice, years of precision, years of unseen preparation. The sling moved faster and faster. The air itself seemed to tighten, because everyone knew this was it. The strike. In a single motion, he released. The stone cut through the air, not just as a weapon, but as a decision that would define history. Jalut did not even react in time. The stone struck him, directly, with precision that no sword could match. And in that moment, the giant fell. The impact, silence, absolute silence. For a brief second, time itself seemed to stop. The man who had controlled the battlefield, who had broken armies without fighting, was on the ground, defeated, not by an army, not by a warrior, but by a boy, with a stone. The collapse of fear, and then, everything changed. The fear that had gripped the Israelite army shattered, because they had just witnessed something impossible. And when the impossible happens, it destroys limitations. They surged forward, not because they suddenly became stronger, but because fear was no longer controlling them. On the other side, the Philistines broke, because their strength was built on one man. And when that man fell, so did their confidence. The lesson of the battle. Understand this carefully. The battle was not won when the stone hit. It was won the moment Dawood refused to be afraid. Everything else was just the result. The rise begins. That day, a giant fell, but something else rose. Dawood AS was no longer just a shepherd. He had become a symbol of what happens when faith overcomes fear. But this was only the beginning. Because victory brings attention, and attention brings trials, of a different kind. The shift of power, news of the victory spread, not slowly, but like fire, across lands, across tribes. A young boy had defeated the greatest warrior. But in a world already shifting, where empires were rising, this event did not exist in isolation. The Neo-Assyrian resurgence continued, a storm building in the distance. The Phoenicians expanded their reach, mastering the seas and controlling trade. Power was evolving, and now, a new name had entered the world. Dawood, the hidden truth. But here is something most people miss. Victory is not the end of struggle. It is the beginning of responsibility. Because once you prove yourself, the world watches, and expectations rise. The giant was gone. The battle was won. But a new challenge was coming. Not from outside, but from within. Because the real test was not defeating Jalut, it was what came after. Victory changes everything, but not always in the way people expect. The battlefield was still, the dust had barely settled, yet something invisible had already begun. A shift, not just in power, but in destiny. The aftermath. The Israelites returned not as a broken people, but as a force reborn. Songs were sung, stories spread, the name of Dawood echoed across valleys and cities. A shepherd, who faced a giant, and won. But fame is a double-edged sword. Because when people begin to praise you, others begin to question you. The eyes of a king. King Dawood watched everything. He had seen the battle. He had seen the impossible become reality. At first, there was pride, relief, gratitude, but slowly, something else began to grow. A question: why him? Why not me? This is how trials begin. Not with enemies, but with thoughts. The rising tension. As Dawood's name spread, so did comparisons. People spoke. They admired. They repeated the story again and again. And with every retelling, Dawood's status grew. But power does not like to be shared. Even when it is not threatened, it feels threatened. Dawood began to see Dawood differently. Not as a hero, but as a possibility. A possibility that could one day replace him. The test after the victory. Understand this clearly. Defeating Jalut was a physical test. But what came next was far more dangerous. The test of ego. The test of patience. The test of character. Because it is easy to stay humble when no one knows you. The real challenge is staying grounded when the world praises you. The character of Dawood. But Dawood AS was not like others. He did not chase power. He did not demand recognition. He remained the same, calm, focused, connected to Allah. This is what made him different. Because while others were changing around him, he did not change within. The divine gift. And then, Allah elevated him, not just as a warrior, but as something far greater. He was granted wisdom, judgment, and eventually, kingship. This is mentioned clearly. Allah gave him authority, and taught him what he willed. This was not earned through ambition. It was granted through sincerity. The king Who was different. When Dawood became king, he did not rule like others. He ruled with justice, not the kind that benefits the powerful, but the kind that protects the weak. His decisions were not based on emotion, but on truth. This is what made his kingdom different. Because true leadership is not about control, it is about responsibility. A voice that moved mountains. But there was something even more unique. Dawood AS was given a voice. A voice so powerful, that when he recited, even nature responded. The mountains echoed with him. The birds gathered. This was not ordinary. This was a sign. Because his strength was not just in battle, but in connection with God. The lesson most people miss. Now pause for a moment. Look at the entire journey. A shepherd, a battlefield, a giant, a king. What connects all of this? It is not strength. It is not skill. It is not even opportunity. It is one thing: faith. The global parallel. While Dawood's kingdom rose, the world continued to shift. The Neo-Assyrians grew stronger. Their campaigns expanded. Their dominance spread. The Phoenicians mastered the seas. Their ships reached distant lands, carrying influence far beyond their size. Power was everywhere, but not all power was the same. Because most power was built on control, Dawood's power was built on justice. This is where the story becomes personal. Because every person faces their own Jalut, not always in the form of a giant. Sometimes it is fear, sometimes it is doubt, sometimes it is the voice that says, "You cannot do this." And in that moment, you have a choice, to step back, or to step forward. The warning, but here is the truth most people ignore. Victory is not the end. If you defeat your fear today, you will face a new test tomorrow. If you rise once, you will be tested again. Because growth always comes with trials. The legacy of Dawood as did not just defeat a giant. He redefined what strength means. He showed that faith can overcome fear, that humility can survive success, and that true power comes from Allah. His story did not end with victory. It continued through leadership, through justice, through legacy. Now think about this. If you were standing in that valley, would you be among those who stayed silent? Or the one who stepped forward? Because moments like this still exist. Different form. Same test. If this story made you think, if it made you question your own fears, then stay connected. Because the next story might be the one that changes everything for you.